Throughout the history of the United States, there's been a systematic path of recessions and depressions aimed at keeping the majority of the population in poverty or balancing on the brink. This tactic was carried over from Rome and Britain, and it has three primary functions. First, to keep the poor continually working through lowering wages and rising expenses. To keep the middle class just above the poverty line so that through their fear of crossing it, they unwittingly help sustain the class system by managing it. Lastly, to ensure no one has the necessary financial resources to fight or challenge the system. Money is the new form of slavery and distinguishable from the old simply by the fact that it is impersonal, that there is no human relation between master and slave. Leo Tolstoy. The U.S. financial system as well as international economics were created to give value to worthless paper in order to use these newly created fiat currencies to buy the world's resources that have true intrinsic value, therefore creating an economic system of control for all of those beneath it. This monolithic poverty generator is the key of controlling both human populations and governments, and its frail foundation is only held up by the global population's lack of understanding of only one word: value. In 1910, Senator Nelson Aldrich, chairman of the U.S. Senate Finance Committee on Banking Reform, J.P. Morgan, founder of J.P. Morgan & Chase, an international financier, Abraham Andrew, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Frank Vanderlip, the President of National City Bank of New York, Henry Davison, the Senior Partner of J.P. Morgan & Company, Charles Norton, the President of First National Bank of New York, and Paul Warburg, partner in Kuhn Loeb & Company, secretly boarded a train headed for Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia to write a bill that would become the U.S. Federal Reserve Act, signed in 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson. President Wilson would later say, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. The great industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote by the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." The U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, gives the responsibility to coin money to the United States Congress. The reason for this is simple. Money goes from the government to the banks, then to the people, or directly to the people in some cases. What has happened under the Federal Reserve is that the government has contracted the Fed to print money. The money that they print is given to the government at interest to pay for the service. And here's the problem. If you have to pay the Fed through interest with money that is being printed by the Fed, you can never possibly pay back the debt created by the continuous interest payments. The next issue is, since the Fed has complete control over how much currency is in the system at any given time, they can use this power to expand or contract the currency supply whenever they wish. To understand how the Fed wields this power, let us take a deeper look at the causes of the Great Depression of 1929. The 1920s were referred to as the Roaring Twenties because it was a time of great economic prosperity. A large reason for this was the Fed's expansion of the currency supply, which gave banks more money for loans. The loans were used for investing in all aspects of personal life and business, which created a high standard of life in the United States. We now refer to this as a bubble. Between 1929 and 1933, the Fed contracted the money supply by 1/3. This contraction of the money supply meant far less money was going into the system. Faith in the system soon collapsed, and with it, the stock market crashed, causing the Great Depression. And also, since the contraction of the currency lasted until 1933, essentially, this prolonged the Great Depression. Now for a more recent look at this financial tactic, let us look at the Great Recession of 2008, which technically we're still in. First, the Fed lowers interest rates to 1%, so banks could borrow at 1%. A large deal of this money was used for home loans for people who could not possibly pay them back. The banks then boxed hundreds or thousands of these loans together and traded them. And since the people could not pay back the loans, eventually the boxed loans fell through. This turned the system into a huge game of musical chairs. This led to foreclosures going up a record 81% from 2008 to 2009. Financially, the last ones with the loans were the ones left without a seat. But at the end of the day, the banks still had the homes, and all of the wealth goes back to the Fed, who control the banks, who now have the homes. In 2011, Forbes reported since the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed has allocated over $16 trillion to overseas banks and corporations, transferring even more money out of the system. And then in 2013, the Fed announced that $9 trillion were missing from their books. Because of these tactics, currency manipulation and downright theft, since the implementation of the Federal Reserve, the purchasing power of the dollar has gone down over 95%, and it is still dropping. Since the dropping of the gold standard in 1971, the dollar is now completely a fiat currency, so its value is based on inflation, international exchange rates, or basically however much the markets feel it should be worth. But inflation is a key component. Now, the dictionary will tell you that inflation is 1. The act of inflating something, 2. The general increase of the cost of living. Under the gold standard, the dollar held its value, but the issue with fiat currencies is they're valued based on market perceptions and manipulations. So, if you 1. Inflate a currency supply, the value of the currency goes down, in turn making 2. The prices go up. But prices are not going up because products and services having more value. It is the value of the currency itself that is going down. Vladimir Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuous process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. This brings us to plank 5 of the Communist Manifesto: centralization of credit in the hands of the state by the means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Does this statement sound familiar? It should, because this is exactly what the Federal Reserve is and what it does.